You're listening to a Roddenberry Podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry Podcast.
Episode 73, A Man's World. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Earl Green.
And I'm Ashley Thomas.
Each week on Gene-ology, we introduce new evidence exhibits from the early TV writing work of Gene Roddenberry, trying to get to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
So help me God.
Of whether Gene was truly ahead of his time, even before he went on to create the work he's best known for, a little show we call Star Trek.
Now, before we get to trivia on this week's episode, please let me take a brief moment to encourage you to join our Patreon or follow us on YouTube or leave us a review wherever you're listening to us. Or, hey, why not go for the hat trick? Get all of the above. Patreon is your gateway to all things Mission Log, including exclusive access to the unedited version of our show and our private Discord server where you can interact with us, your hosts, Earl and me, during scheduled live chats, along with occasional screenings. You can access all of this for a mere $1 a month, so head over to patreon.com/missionlog to see what tier works for you and join the conversation. Folks, by the way, reviews really do help our shows far more than you could possibly imagine. Even if you don't have the words for a written review, a 5-star rating really does go a long way to tell the algorithm that you like us, you love us, you want some more of us, and that other people might like us too. We're counting on our loyal genealogists to help us spread the word. And now, Your Honor, begging the court's indulgence, if no one has any objections, this week's trivia. Earl, what have you brought to court today?
Okay, I am ready to enter quite a bit of evidence on the record. So much that some of it's actually going to show up later and not just in the trivia segment.
Nice.
Because we've got our hands on some cool paperwork here. When I started trying to research the trivia for today's show, I knew absolutely nothing about the Joan Crawford Show, just that it was a thing that existed, and it was committed to film, and that we had what was supposedly Gene's script for the pilot that was shot. It turns out I was wrong, and it's quite a bit more complicated than that, because I didn't know which questions to ask, such as, which Joan Crawford show are we talking about here? It turns out there were 2 pilots, made 7 years apart. Both of these were filmed. Joan Crawford was enough of a star that the idea of building a Playhouse anthology show around her was an appealing one. Surely people would tune in to see Joan anchor a different cast every week, taking on different genres of storytelling from one week to the next. The idea was that the stories could shift from comedy to serious subject matter and cover all the ground in between. To find more answers, I found a book called The Encyclopedia of Unaired Television Pilots, 1945 to 2018, published in 2018 by McFarland and researched and written by Vincent Terrace, author of a huge number of such directories of American television programming. There's one whole paragraph in the book devoted to the topic of this show, or at least what I thought was this show, telling us that the 1952 attempt at the Joan Crawford Show was intended for syndication, while the 1959 attempt was undertaken by CBS. According to the book, and I quote, MCA Universal backed the 1952 pilot, but the terms to acquire Miss Crawford for a weekly series after the pilot were prohibitive at the time. $200,000 a year for a 5-year deal, plus 50% ownership of the filmed properties. In 1959, CBS produced a second anthology pilot for Miss Crawford, but an exact reason for its rejection was not stated. That doesn't answer all the questions. Everything that paragraph says is correct. The 1959 pilot did air on CBS, May 15th, 1959, with Joan starring alongside Ken Curtis just before he got his big break with the premiere of Gunsmoke, and a young actor making his first TV appearance, future Lost in Space star Mark Goddard. Was that the one that Gene wrote? No. Go ahead and sound the blasting sirens. We're about to blow up the TV history books again. Because a real rarity turned up in the Roddenberry archives, actual production correspondence related to this particular project. The correspondence was all dated 1961. These memos are all on Columbia Pictures Interoffice Memo letterhead, since Columbia was the parent company of Screen Gems, where Gene was still under contract. They are dated between February and April of 61. The script itself is dated late May of 61. So this is a third attempt to mount the Joan Crawford Show, which has remained completely unchronicled until now. No one's laid eyes on this script for 64 years. It never went in front of the cameras. It doesn't show up on Gene's IMDb, doesn't show up on Joan Crawford's IMDb since it was never made. It did not make it past the script stage. So this is Joan Crawford Show version 3.0. To make it clear, TLDR, while pilots were produced in 52 and 59, this 1961 pilot never left the printed page. But maybe we'll find out why in today's show. I have a theory. For the sake of context, it was the spring of 1961 and the clock was ticking on Gene's development deal with Screen Gems. It was already a lucrative deal. Gene had found ways to make it more lucrative by playing up the idea that other studios were trying to headhunt him, and the Screen Gems contract helped to keep the wolf from the door in a way that mere random freelance writing couldn't guarantee. It was a very nice period of career stability in a career that just isn't known for being very stable. At the end of the contract, Gene would be wading back into the shark-infested waters of picking up whatever Hollywood script assignments he could land, a path that led him back to a few more adventures with Paladin, and after that, almost completely away from the Western genre as a whole. But with his years at Screen Gems having led to a lot of pilots that didn't sell, and one little series that didn't last, Gene was now being assigned to various projects that he had not created, including various episode assignments for other Screen Gems series. The Office Memos deal not only with this assignment, but with other Screen Gems assignments we'll be covering in the weeks ahead, and also with the end of Gene's time at the studio.
Going to plead him guilty tomorrow, Val?
Guilty of trying to kill a rattlesnake?
Look, Val, there's not one of us in the DA's office who wouldn't give his left arm, let's say, to get Tivoli. But it's got to be done within the law. We can't let private citizens go around pot-shotting at people.
Simple temporary insanity, my dear prosecutor.
Val, you prove Tivoli's head of the syndicate, prove he's sending the hood who wrecked your boy's cafe, and we'll deal. Can you do it?
Did you see this move?
Whose side are you on anyway?
His side. I'm a defense lawyer, remember?
Are you sure your client understands that, Val?
Prologue. Fade up to a small cafe with stacks of plates, some plates with food on them, ready for the day's business. A man's hand knocks the stack over and then keeps breaking things. The hand belongs to a man named O'Banion, a thuggish type who seems to have set out to destroy the place with his bare hands. The cafe's waitress, Betty Franklin, moves to stop O'Banion, only to get the contents of a pot of simmering, hot-off-the-stove food dumped on her. Later, Betty's husband Ed has arrived, but rather than comforting Betty, he reaches under the cash register and pulls out an Army-issue automatic and an ammo clip and turns to leave. Record scratch, freeze frame. Okay, maybe without the record scratch. An attorney named Valerie Downs starts talking in voiceover. Imagine she sounds a lot like Joan Crawford. She says, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, a small cafe on extremely valuable land. So well located it caught the eye of a gangland czar. How to succeed in real estate? Lower the price, buy at a bargain. Defense exhibit number 1, how gangland moves into legitimate business. As any engineer will tell you, the strongest steel has a breaking point. As an attorney, I tell you, so has flesh and blood. Defense exhibit number 2, the owner of the cafe, Ed Franklin, on his way to kill a man." Ed Franklin marches into the office of one Jerome Tivoli, marches past the front desk secretary without even trying to hide the weapon in his hand, storms into Tivoli's office, and starts shooting. Tivoli hits the deck. A young woman named Paula, who happens to be in his office, starts screaming. Tivoli's bodyguards try to grab Ed, whose aim is finally true, hitting Tivoli in the arm with one bullet. Freeze on that again as Valerie continues. Why deal with hired underlings when you can go right to the boss? The man on his belly is scrambling for life like one of his own victims is Jerome Tivoli, head of the syndicate. A premeditated, violent crime. Attempted murder. But which man is the true criminal? We now see Valerie Downs in the courtroom defending Ed Franklin at trial and asking the jury to ponder their decision carefully. Act 1. A limo pulls into a parking space in front of a police precinct. The limo driver, a hulk of a man named Chad, gets out and opens another door, and out comes Valerie. With Chad following closely, Valerie makes her way to a police interview room. She passes a deputy DA, Bill Evans, with whom she exchanges some friendly barbs over Valerie's current case, before she goes on to talk to Ed Franklin in the interview room. Ed seems confident that Valerie can beat his attempted murder charges, but Valerie wants to practice for Ed's cross-examination and takes the role of the prosecuting attorney, coming in hot. And Ed Franklin is shook. She makes him realize that he hasn't done a very good job of connecting the dots from O'Banion, the thug who wrecked his cafe, to Jerome Tivoli. Still playing prosecutor, Valerie keeps pressing her attack until Franklin calls for the police sergeant outside to open the door. But Valerie isn't going to be gotten rid of that easily. The whole middle of the story is missing. Ed claims he didn't want to sell his cafe for pennies on the dollar, but his testimony as it stands now does not connect the whole thing to Tivoli, nor does it explain where Betty went, why she vanished on the day Ed tried to kill Tivoli and got arrested. But you know who does know the middle of the story? Chad, Valerie's assistant. He doesn't just drive the limo, he investigates crime. And Chad has discovered that Betty was working for Tivoli before she and Ed got married. As the head waitress, she was in a perfect position to undermine the success of Ed's business from within, but instead, she fell for Ed and was working against her old boss. So, where is she? Because she's the one person who can connect the dots for the judge and the jury. Ed lashes out at his own lawyer. What are you trying to do, get Betty killed? Valerie calmly points out the cold logic of it all. She's as dangerous to Tivoli next year as she is right now. Who's going to protect her? You? You'll be in a steel cage and she'll be outside running. Where will she go for help, Ed? Ed Franklin cracks. Betty's sheltering at the East Side YWCA. Valerie formulates a plan to get Betty a quiet apartment under guard. Valerie's next stop is her office to make the arrangements. When she arrives, her secretary, Martha Hanks, who Valerie just calls Hank, has two disturbing pieces of news. One, Val's new hat has arrived, and it's just not a good look. Two, a man named Orrin Gifford is waiting in her office to see her. Turns out Gifford is an old flame, from before Valerie was married and before her husband passed away and she took over his law office. She's genuinely rattled by him reappearing now, and he's wasting no time inviting himself to her place for dinner. He already seems to know the address. A bit later, there's someone in Jerome Tivoli's office, too. This visitor also happens to be Orrin Gifford. He's working for Tivoli. Rattling Valerie's cage is the plan. Well, the beginning of it. What Tivoli really wants Gifford to do is get Valerie to let slip where Betty Franklin is. Act 2. That night, Orrin Gifford arrives at Valerie's apartment, which is, of course, a place with a spectacular view overlooking Central Park. She's still a little bit shaken by Gifford's sudden reappearance in her life, and he's trying to shift the balance of power in the room by asserting his masculinity, which is about as good a look as that hat. He tries to get her talking about work, and Valerie volunteers a little bit too much info, saying she's located a witness whose testimony could break up a crime syndicate. Gifford casually says, "Sounds exciting. Where did you find her?" Objection? Valerie did not identify the gender of her witness. and Gifford tries to recover the fumble on the 20-yard line, saying, you said waitress, when Valerie is pretty sure she said witness. Val tries to shift the conversation to what Gifford's doing for work these days, when there's a knock at the door. It's Hank doing the wingman thing, just in case Val needs an emergency exit from her date. Val says it's all okay, Gifford has changed. But while Hank's here, Chad found a room for Betty Franklin to stay in, wrote the address down for you. Gifford sees that Hank is here and guesses why she's here, and he dismisses her. No escape hatch needed here, ma'am. And, I don't think she was asking him. Hank slips the address into Val's purse and sees herself out. While Valerie is busy pouring drinks, Gifford slips the piece of paper with the address out of her purse. The next day in court, something is missing, and that something is Betty Franklin. Chad was dispatched to bring her to the courtroom, but he's been gone a couple of hours now, and Valerie is stalling for time. Ed Franklin is in a panic. When Tivoli gives him a triumphant look from across the courtroom, Ed has an outburst. Tivoli, if you touched her, I'll kill you. So help me God, next time I won't miss. Well, we are now hip-deep in things that are not a good look in this story. The prosecutor, Bill Evans, remember him, objects to the wait. Chad shows up empty-handed. Valerie confers with Evans, and they agree to a recess, but the judge only grants that until 2 o'clock. But Chad, following his gut, has been chasing down some other leads. It turns out Orrin Gifford runs a casino in Las Vegas, owned by Jerome Tivoli, and Chad's got the paperwork proving it. But for right now, Gifford's still in the Big Apple. Valerie sets Chad into motion. Call Gifford where he's staying, say it looks like Valerie has lost the big case, she needs a broad shoulder to cry on, and meet her at the courtroom at 2 o'clock to pick her up. The trap is set. Although he's a little bit late, and the judge is threatening to fast forward to closing arguments if Valerie can't produce a witness to put on the stand, Gifford does walk into the courtroom, at which point Valerie unexpectedly calls him to the witness stand. Tivoli gives Gifford a look, a serious don't F this up look, as he is sworn in. But Gifford still thinks he's in the driver's seat. Until, over Evans' objections that this is another irrelevant stalling tactic, Valerie introduces as evidence the paperwork Chad looked up. It's Gifford's turn to be rattled. The trap is sprung, and he walked into it face first. For her next trick, Valerie proves that Gifford and O'Banion knew each other. In fact, they served time together. Gifford becomes combative on the stand, and finally, visibly agitated and a little scared. Valerie says, "That's okay, Gifford. You're looking a little tired. We can continue this tomorrow." She asks the judge about putting Gifford in protective custody. Gifford's manly man pride is insulted. "I don't need protection. I'm not afraid of Jerry Tivoli." This then turns into a rant, with Gifford finally saying that without him, Tivoli's operation would fold. From the gallery, Tivoli shouts a threatening, "Shut up, Gifford!" But Gifford doesn't listen. He goes on to brag that he picked Tivoli's men for him, including one Mr. O'Banion. Well, that drops a stunned silence on the courtroom. Valerie keeps pushing Gifford's buttons. And Betty Franklin, the defendant's wife, did you know her? Gifford says she was on Tivoli's payroll too. Valerie keeps goading him. "But you don't know where she is?" And Gifford blurts out an address and confirms she's being held there. And with that, Action Chad is on his way. No Chads are hanging around here waiting to act on that information. Back in Valerie's office, a little bit of time has passed, and the Franklins have come to thank her in person for, in all probability, saving both their lives. Hank proudly tells them that Tivoli has been indicted, and Chad put Gifford on a train out of New York before anyone else could get to him. Oh, and Deputy DA Bill Evans wants to know if Valerie has dinner plans. She does, and they don't include anyone but her. The end.
I believe you have rested your case very well. Great job on the recap, bro.
There's a lot going on, and I kind of wish... my notes for the rest of the show are going to involve a lot of dialogue from the script. If I had included all of the dialogue that I loved in the recap would have been half an hour long, and we basically would have had to broken this up into 2 shows.
Yeah.
This is a really good script.
Yeah, we'll get into it a little more later, but I was like, oh, this is interesting. We got a lady lawyer in 1961. This is cool. Okay, well, and then we've also got, wow, this one dude, he sure is saying a whole lot of misogynistic crap. And then I was not expecting the turn at the end. So that was really satisfying to watch or to read, I suppose.
Yeah, it's, I wish we could watch it. I wish this got made.
Yeah.
Because
I know, right?
It feels like it would have been a good vehicle for everyone involved.
Right.
The dialogue was so sharp. Some of the stage directions, I got thoughts. Such as the stage direction setting the scene in Tivoli's office at the beginning, right before Ed Franklin comes in shooting. And it mentions that Tivoli is accompanied by, and I quote, a well-dressed, well-stacked blonde, Paula. Well, okay. Guess we're casting from the script here.
I guess so.
It saves you the trouble of going to that casting session.
Yeah, right? Like, Will.
But...
Do we like, these sizes need not apply?
I have a feeling that there are probably like polite, non-actionable ways to say that to casting directors or between casting people. And it's just this accepted thing.
Yeah.
Like I said, lots of thoughts there.
Yeah.
There are better stage directions than that, though, such as these describing Valerie. Her fashionable attire, long-limbed feminine grace, contrasts strangely with this coldly utilitarian male background. But she moves with the assuredness of someone completely at home, and it's quickly obvious Val is well known there, completely accepted. This, in fact, sets our theme, a many-faceted woman highly capable in either a woman's or a man's world. I want to focus on that phrase, Val is well known there and completely accepted. Boy, does that sound familiar. It sounds like she is number one in the legal profession here.
Right.
Now, I am going to spend the rest of the show calling Evans Mr. Deputy District Attorney.
Mr. Deputy.
And he's playing checkers with a prisoner through the bars, and it's like, okay, does this show up on your billable hours? How do you itemize this?
That's a good question.
It's just an odd thing. It seems unthinkable now. Maybe there was just less crime going on, or just less stuff that he had to get involved with. So, sure, I'll keep this guy some company.
Yeah. Because I forget who the prisoner was, like called the professor. Was he like a key witness in something they're working on, or he just becomes buddies with him at the prison?
Yeah, and the professor is like, okay, so are we talking Einstein hair, or are we talking Doc Brown hair? It's like, help me envision this. Now, Evans also has a line about giving one's left arm, complete with pause. That feels like it's something from a 1991 crime show, not 1961.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, you really just said that.
Yeah, that piece of humor is way ahead of its time.
Right. I was like, I was not expecting that.
I am sure guys talked like that back then.
Oh, sure.
But I have real doubts about whether or not that line would have made it to the air.
Oh, no, I don't think that would have made it to TV.
We have some more classic sharp Gene dialogue here from Chad, who says, lawyers got one thing common with doctors, ma'am. Neither one can look inside a man without spilling some blood. And reading that line, I was thinking, okay, now this sounds like something written by the same guy who gave us, now you're beginning to talk like a doctor, bartender. Take your choice. We both get the same two kinds of customers, living and the dying.
Right.
That's the good dialogue. There are a few specimens of dialogue that maybe want to punch the script.
Yeah.
When Hank, of all people, Hank, let us down. Hank asks, instead of a new hat every week, Val, why not save up and get a man? Shoot me now.
My first thought was like, wait a minute, you can go, do we just go to the store? or like, oh, no, this is not what we're doing here. But yeah, that's,
That's a line that somebody was expected to say out loud.
Uh-huh. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a choice.
Yeah, it was all going so well before that.
Well, the reality is, I can't say I haven't heard comparable things.
True.
Said out loud.
Now, yeah.
Yeah. Like, so it's frustrating. But yes, that was a line where I was like, oh, come on, really?
Yeah.
Why?
That aside, I do want to float a casting suggestion for Hank, who's Val's secretary. For some reason, as I read this script, I could not help but hear Majel Barrett saying those lines.
Yeah, I based on her description too, like, okay, yeah, that could be a Majel.
Yeah, and so I really found myself wondering if this was the beginning of Gene trying to make sure Majel was getting roles, trying to make sure she was getting work. He and Majel did know each other by this time.
Right.
And it just seems like a very Majel kind of role because it also reminded me of her character from Spectre, which was kind of the supernatural TV pilot that Gene did in 77.
Right.
Where she was also, and this kind of goes back to 333 Montgomery, she's the assistant who knows better than all the guys do what's going on and what to do.
Right.
And she seems like she is filling that role here. I absolutely hate that we announce for everyone to hear that Valerie only has this job because she took over her late husband's practice. This was all going so well before we said that.
Right.
Could she not have gotten the job of her own merits? And yes, I know, in 1961, the answer is probably going to be no. So even though we have changed setting and era, we are still getting the lady rancher who inherited the ranch when the husband was out of the picture for one reason or another. I will have more thoughts on this later. Now, Gifford is trying to tell Tivoli that, he is a valuable, loyal, vital member of Team Tivoli.
Mm-hmm.
And Tivoli says, we? We? I don't understand that word. But first off, I started thinking of Al Capone in the Untouchables movie. Because, this is, the whole thing about teamwork. It's not really about teamwork. He's about to ice a dude in front of everyone.
Right.
But, after this whole thing, we? I don't understand that word. Man, I would have traveled back in time and handed Gene $20 cash on the spot if Gifford had said, well, boss, it's French. But that's why Gene is writing these scripts and I'm not.
Hey, it's okay.
Everyone may thank their lucky stars for that at a time and place of their choosing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in Act 2, let's talk about Gifford being Mr. Misogyny.
You and I have written the same line in our notes, like, interesting how you instinctively serve a man. I'm like, oh, bro, no, don't, no. You were doing so good. The script was, I was like, the script was, overall, I was like, this is pretty good. No, not having it.
The only thing I was holding out hope for at this point was this was a descendant of Zumwalt from Whiplash. You remember how offended we were at the fact that Zumwalt was talking and kept talking and no one was stopping him from talking because everything that came out of his mouth was awful?
Right.
So that was the only hope I was holding out here is, okay, please let this be Zumwalt 61.
Yeah.
Which sounds like a wine.
Hey, it might be. You never know. I've found some comfort, at least, in pretty much all the grossly misogynistic things said in the script were said by
bad guys.
by bad guys, so I was happy at least for that. But split personality, a lawyer by day, a woman by night. She-Hulk has entered the chat.
What I wouldn't have given Valerie to just Hulk out on some of these guys in this script.
Yeah. I was so grossed out by that line. Like, team, why not both? Like, I'm sorry. Like,
I don't think she stopped being a woman.
Yeah. Like, so many thoughts about that. So those were a couple of lines that made me want to, forcibly toss the script across the room, had I had a physical copy of the script.
Now, there is some delightful stuff in the second act, though. I love Hank being Val's wingman.
Yes,
that is delightfully. I did not know women did this before the cell phone age.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's always good. Like, hey, if your date's not going great, like, you got to have somebody knows where you're going. Somebody who can call or whatever. I know a lot of places too now will do you go to the bar and ask for Angela.
Yeah, or order a specific drink, and that's the call for help.
Yeah, and they will get you out.
Yeah.
So I'm like, one, I'm sorry that we live in a world where this is necessary. Yes. But two, hey, good on her for, being her backup. I thought that was really cool. I actually kind of enjoy playing the wing woman role. I think it's fun. Not like fun, but like, like, hey, if this person's messing with you, I will be as awkward, kind of like the wingman is all like, oh, I'm going to, talk you up, make you look good, whatever. I was like, what's the opposite of that? I will do that. If you need out of a situation, I will do that. And make no apologies for it. I will make it as awkward as possible. Because I don't want anybody to mess with my buddy. So there you go.
Yeah. Whatever Valerie is paying Hank, it ain't enough.
Yeah.
Just
truly.
gonna say that right now.
Truly. Yeah. Yeah. I did take issue with, like, why would you overplay your hand? Like, or not overplay your hand, but like, why would you share details of a case with someone who is not working on the case? I kind of feel like that might be illegal.
It feels like it.
Or at least in bad practice.
Yeah, like it's a violation of attorney-client privilege, maybe?
Maybe?
But it had to happen so we could have the stumble and recovery, or at least Gifford attempting to recover from that. He said waitress? That was witness.
Right. Yeah, and so I kind of was frustrated with that. I was also thinking, like, oh, Hank, she's got company. Maybe you should not talk about sensitive stuff, even if it's just at the door.
Yeah, there just seemed like a lot of opportunities for the information to make its way into Gifford's noggin, where it absolutely did not need to be.
Right.
My last note is right at the end of the story. I don't know if you've got anything between the dinner scene and the courtroom.
No. Courtroom would be where my next notes are.
Okay. Now, when we get into the courtroom at the end of Act 2, we had various different textures and colors of pages in this script. And so obviously some bits were replaced in the middle. And then at the end, I think you had something much more akin to the first draft. Where in the courtroom scene, all of a sudden, Theodora appears. The hell is Theodora? Where did she come from? She gets one line in the big courtroom scene, telling Gifford to heed his master's voice like he is Nipper the RCA mascot dog or something. And I noticed that the pages change color and texture halfway through the script. So was this supposed to be Paula? Were these supposed to be the same person?
Unclear, because later, we have like the third draft, which is what we're basing our recap and discussion on, and then in the we've got a first and a second draft, and Theodora, and maybe this is just me not doing the thorough read over the other two drafts, but Theodora, I thought Theodora was maybe Valerie's name instead, but then I'd forgotten that she shows up in the last draft, so...
It's interesting because the names of all the characters were up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally what one of the memos is about. Nobody was too crazy about the names. For anybody, but especially for Chad.
Chad doesn't sound like a lawyer to you?
Gene-ology will return after a short recess and a word from our sponsor, Bold Bubbles.
Hello, Charlene Schmidt here. You might know me as the co-host of Mission Log Prodigy, but did you know that I also make handcrafted soap? I do! Head over to boldbubbles.com, where you'll see designs inspired by the Star Trek universe. Tempt your flesh with the hues of the Borg, or perhaps a plain, simple, unscented bar is more your style. We listen, we don't judge. As a Roddenberry Podcast listener, save 15% on your order with code Roddenberry at checkout. Live long and clean boldly with Bold Bubbles.
Okay, Ashley, let's ignore for just a moment the fact that this is the pilot episode for the Joan Crawford Show, version 3.0.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you see as Valerie Downs? Because I almost can't see Joan Crawford in this role.
It's interesting, Earl, because I am bad sometimes about, one, being face blind, and two, mixing up actors. In my head, I kept thinking of Joan Rivers instead of Joan Crawford.
Okay, that's an interesting mental casting there.
And I'm like, wait a minute. When I went to do a quick Google of Joan Crawford, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's not who I was thinking of. Why did I think she was blonde? And then it's like Joan space and, Google said, do you mean Rivers? It's like, oh, yes, that's who I had in my head.
Okay, that just wiped my mental hard drive. Now I'm not seeing any of this the same way.
Who did you have in mind, but not if not Joan Crawford?
That's just the thing. Not really anyone.
Okay.
But because I am primarily acquainted with Joan Crawford's later work.
Sure.
And when I say later, I mean only about a decade later.
Mm-hmm.
After she died in the 1970s.
Right.
Those roles were really heavy, serious, dramatic things that make me think of her as being just too intense for this.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I just need to watch some stuff and get to know circa 1961 Joan Crawford better. Anyone with recommendations? Leave them in the comments.
Please, because apparently I think she's Joan Rivers, so...
We need help here. You people have no idea.
Sorry, y'all.
But the thing is, Valerie is a great character.
Mm-hmm.
So many shades to her in a script for a half-hour show.
Mm-hmm.
And this was meant to be a half hour. That is something that I gleaned from one of the memos. It's not an hour show, it's a half-hour show.
Mm-hmm.
So we are jam-packed with plot here.
Right.
We have Valerie showing strength and confidence, also vulnerability and second-guessing. We see her getting taken in. We see her absolutely kicking butt and taking control of the situation and recovering from that. And she's funny. She's got a romantic side. And, of course, we have to make her a widow, so she's available for romantic entanglements in an ongoing series. Yeah, I wasn't around to make the TV rules back then. That's just what the rules were. It's why so many TV characters in this period had live kids and a dead spouse.
Right.
And so you could show them being a competent head of family, but still go through the comical motions of, fumbling around trying to get some action.
Mm-hmm.
Because, going all the way back to Lucy and Ricky sleeping in separate beds, TV at that time obviously did not want to deal with what goes on in married households because, oh no, we cannot talk about that. So, widows and widowers all around on TV at this period. Just more proof that anyone who claims the good old days were all about traditional family values were obviously not around in what they regard as the good old days. It's like Woodstock. If you remember it that way, you weren't there.
Right.
But the point of all this is Valerie is a great character with a lot of potential, and she's like a fully rounded, she's a whole person.
Yeah, that was the most impressive thing about this script to me. It's like, oh, she's a woman who has her own agency, and she's smart and competent and don't need no man. I was really impressed that, wow, this is a thing that's going to make it onto TV in 1961? What?
Yeah, and there's even more potential, really, thinking about what the future of the team of Valerie and Hank would have been.
Right? That would have been really fun.
Yeah, because, I mean, you could make serious stories with that. You could make really funny stories with that.
Mm-hmm.
The way Hank has Val's back both on the job and off was fun. I'm there for more of that. The friendly rivalry with Evans was fun. This is a lot of great character development groundwork being laid for a show that was not going to be about these characters next week.
Right.
Or were they? Let's turn to these memos we have from 1961 because they have everything that the script has, including some plotting and scheming and some legal drama.
Okay. Let's hear it.
Let's start with the legal drama and work our way backward. Dated February 27th, 1961, we have a photostat of a letter from Gene's agent at the time, Lawrence Cruikshank. This letter is addressed to William Dozier, television executive at Screen Gems, who was effectively Gene's boss. This is the same William Dozier who would go on to create the 1966 Batman series starring Adam West and Burt Ward. So we've got a really interesting intersection here between the future creators of a couple of immortal pieces of late 60s TV. Cruikshank's letter states, Dear Bill, Gene Roddenberry tells me that today he is handing in his pilot script, Man's World, for the Joan Crawford Show. As you know, Gene was informed only that the leading character was a woman lawyer and was provided neither with format nor character delineations. Teleplay from opening teaser to fade out was his origination. Best regards, Lawrence Cruikshank. On February 28th, Gene himself steps in to clarify in an inter-office memo, also addressed to William Dozier. Dear Bill, reference Lawrence Cruikshank's letter in which you received, I am advised his intention was merely to establish that my script, A Man's World, was an original in story and characterizations, written without reference to formats which may have been prepared or are being prepared by other persons. The letter was not a later claim to 25% of royalties. I do not do business that way and would immediately sever with him if I had reason to think he did. He's fully aware that you and I have a verbal agreement that this will come under the contract's 12.5% clause should it become a pilot production or be used in script form to sell the show. There are a couple more paragraphs of what reads like Gene apologizing for his agent's blunt approach, although I kind of found myself wondering if Gene and Cruikshank were playing good cop, bad cop here. Because, let's face it, Hollywood is a dog-eat-dog world for all of its civilized delineations of duties and unions and guilds and what have you. Anything goes in the fight to stay alive or keep your career alive. So, by this point, I feel like maybe Gene and his agent may have had a very well-honed double act going on. But it's the last paragraph of this memo, kind of a lengthy memo, where it gets interesting again. Gene writes, I did have a number of meetings with Joe Narr, and we did discuss various ideas for the show and its characters. We attended together a Joan Crawford motion picture and a television film, discussed her strengths and weaknesses in certain roles. He was quite honest that all he definitely had was a female lawyer portrayed by Joan Crawford, perhaps assisted by a secretary, a legman, an aunt, and a writer boyfriend. We discussed these roles. I felt free to accept in whole or part, consolidate, improve, or invent new ideas. He did not give me a format. He did not pretend he was doing so. What sketches, suggestions, and comments he did give me were extremely helpful. I consider him an extremely creative producer, inventive and sensitive, and I should hate any implication to be read into Crookshank's letter that I am so hungry for credit that I would state otherwise. By the way, Joe Narr is Joseph T. Narr, a producer who started out as an agent to the stars, with a client roster that included Peter Lawford, Marilyn Monroe, Raquel Welch, and Steve McQueen, among others. Parr moved from artist representation into producing during the heyday of the Playhouse anthology series, eventually becoming a long-running producer of Starsky and Hutch, as well as producing a few movies, notably Blackula and Scream, Blackula, Scream.
Okay.
He collaborated with Sidney Sheldon in refining the format for a new series in the late 70s called Heart to Heart, starring Robert Wagner and Stephanie Powers. Presumably, he would have been executive producer of this iteration of the Joan Crawford Show. And so we're mapping out the characters of Valerie and Hank and so on. This does not sound like a Playhouse anthology series anymore. It sounds like these characters are who this show is about, and calling it the Joan Crawford Show is just a marketing tactic to make damn sure everyone knows who the star of the series is, which was not uncommon back then. There are also memos dated April 28th, ironing out story details, and in some places, Gene refuting suggested changes that he felt would not help the script. Also, as I mentioned earlier, nobody was married to any of the names that these characters have in this script, with Chad coming in for especially sharp criticism. Depending on how you read one of these memos, it looks like the idea was floated that Joan Crawford's character should simply be Joan Crawford. There were other memos dated late March and early April that are more humorous in nature, with Gene confessing he really needs a vacation, and talking about taking 2 weeks off for the last 2 weeks of his Screen Gems contract, and then a further memo suddenly assigning Gene to write 2 episodes of the Screen Gems series Shannon during his remaining time at the studio, so sorry, Gene, no vacation for you.
None.
Gene Roddenberry's Screen Gems contract expired June 20th, 1961. Now, let's go back to the Encyclopedia of Unaired Television Pilots. The 1952 version of the Joan Crawford Show, which definitely would have been a Playhouse series, probably would have had the best timing, since Joan Crawford was at her most bankable around that time, was structured as a potential 5-year run, with Joan getting a colossal, for the time, $200,000 payout each year it was on. So if this show runs 5 years, that is $1 million. That's $1 million in 1952 money. Adjust it for now, that looks like $12 million.
Wow.
Not bad for a lady in 61, whether she is an actress or a lawyer. Her deal, had that show gone past the pilot, would have given her 50% ownership of the filmed properties. Only A-listers, regardless of what is in their pants, could strong-arm that kind of deal in the 50s.
Right.
It is possible that she was trying to hold Screen Gems to similar terms for this third try at the Joan Crawford Show. So she's claiming $200,000 a year at 50% ownership. And here comes Gene Roddenberry up. Who's he again? Oh, yeah, anybody watch Wrangler last year on NBC? That guy. He's staking his claim to 12.5% of this show should it go to series.
Right.
Now, it is known that his contract with Screen Gems assured that he would have that level of ownership and participation in anything he created for them. So, is that 12.5% coming out of Screen Gems' half or out of Joan Crawford's half? I don't think it's coming out of Joan's half.
Right.
I would not want to be any man walking into a room to put that contract term to her. So when we're carving up the pie this early, before the show even films a pilot, I think we're starting to see the fault lines spreading through the paperwork and figuring out why everyone decided, let's just not pursue this any further.
Right.
What is really sad about that is This is one of the best Gene scripts I have read so far.
Yeah. The way that we get to see her, take command of a situation where, oh snap, I messed up, but then, okay, I can fix it though. She didn't need anybody to come in and rescue her. Like, she's like, all right, I messed up. Let me fix it. And she got herself out of that jam so smoothly and wonderfully and really just, I love that she got to emasculate Gifford as a point of court record.
Yes.
like it's on the books. Like, I just, made you into a soprano real quick.
Did you catch that she looks at the court stenographer, who is probably also a woman, like, you getting this, babe?
Yeah.
It's all so sharp, and the characters are alive.
Right.
And with the exception of a few things that are just reflecting the rampant sexism of the early 60s.
This is really good stuff here. I'm sorry that this did not get filmed, at least.
It doesn't feel like it's from 1961. This feels like much later than that.
Absolutely.
This feels like it had to come from 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think we've got proof here. Gene really needed to park the horse and put the cowboy boots in the closet and get off the Western Trail so his best work could emerge, because this is one of the best things we have read so far that he wrote.
For sure. I would agree. All right, Earl, I think we're about ready to rest our case on this particular pilot that sadly did not make it to screen, because this is fantastic stuff.
Yeah, it may be a man's world, but it's Gene's world, and it's starting to feel really familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're starting to see, oh, this is the guy who writes women so well. It's like, no, it really kicks in here. It's like, oh no, he's got it.
Mm-hmm.
He's really on it. Let me ask you a wild question before we do our final summation here.
Mm-hmm.
You think someone could produce this now, use the script completely intact, and just make it a period piece?
Yes. I think you could easily. You would have to call it something other than the Joan Crawford Show, but
yeah.
That would be like the only major change. I think you could. I mean, we've seen some really good, like, 1960s period pieces lately. I think in particular about The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and how well that tackled, like, misogyny and things like that. And also, anytime we're talking about hats, I keep thinking of her billions of hat boxes and things like that. So I know she doesn't fit the description, but can we bring Midge and Susie out of there and put them in here as Val and Hank?
Well, at least one of them is hanging out with Superman these days.
Hey. Oh.
So she's got a full dance card.
Wait. I'm sorry. I did not make that connection. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Sorry, she's busy.
Yes, she's busy. All right.
We got to recast it. I say we just call it the Joan Crawford Show and just let people figure out what the hell is that for.
Huh? Let's open the phone book, find everyone named Joan Crawford. Congratulations.
From that memo, it's like, oh, maybe we should just call Joan Crawford. Man, if this had taken off, I could just see it now. It'd be like 1967 or something. Someone would be calling her up at home. Could you take on this case for me, ma'am? For the last time, I was not really a lawyer. It was just on TV.
I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on TV.
So there you have it. The real reason the Joan Crawford Show did not happen, because she did not want that phone call.
No.
Not too long ago, we were praising Sally. And before that, we were praising the Sarong Sorority. Why didn't we call it the Sarong Sorority back then? I like that.
That's a good question. Why didn't we think of that? Good job.
We were so hung up on dad jokes involving Cobb. To have that kernel of an idea. But those characters really started proving that despite some missteps in Gene's earlier work, he is really doing much better at writing women who stand on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And even some of those early missteps, here is how I justified those when we ran across them way back when, talking about stuff like Ella West or what have you. Gene was just hewing to the absolutely male-dominated societal norms of the 50s and 60s. And you have to keep in mind that male-dominated world, he was raised in that. He was indoctrinated into that system.
Right.
I feel like part of what we are seeing in his script writing is that he is coming around on that count.
Mm-hmm.
He is changing his worldview. He's taking on new information and realizing there is inequality, and maybe we need to start getting into this in script form, dealing with it, whether as a comedy or a drama. Get it in front of people. Get them thinking about it. Get them talking about it. And, you know, it's not just the 50s that were guilty of that. You know, I was born in the 70s, raised in the 80s. I could totally relate to having to shake off the cultural indoctrination of that time a lot. Mm-hmm. As a parent raising boys now, I still see room for improvement. Every generation almost has a responsibility to throw off the shackles of the previous generation's traditions, because a lot of traditions are really not helpful, and some of them are pretty damn harmful.
Right.
Valerie is the latest in that line of women that Gene writes well. My one concern being that maybe you almost needed someone with a lighter touch than mid-career Joan Crawford to play this character. And, you know, our dream casting for a modern remount of the script that we were just engaging in. I love that idea.
Yeah. Perfect.
Trying to fit Joan Crawford or my mental picture of Joan Crawford into this script was my biggest challenge. I felt like also as a courtroom drama, this was a gigantic improvement over 333 Montgomery.
Right.
I do feel like there is a straight line between Martha Hanks and the lady who was DeForest Kelley's legal assistant in 333 Montgomery. I feel like there's a straight line between those characters. But here you have 1961. This is so far ahead of its time. A well-developed A story of the actual case, and a zinger of a B story that seems like a romantic subplot coming out of nowhere. Oh no, it's also part of the A story. We snuck it in on you.
That was really clever. Wasn't anticipating that.
The best part of it all, hands down, is that Valerie's got this. No matter what happens, she's got this.
Mm-hmm.
Mistakes are made. She does recover from them. So I feel like there's a straight line from Sally in Two Faces West to Valerie Downs in the Joan Crawford Show that never got made.
Right.
But she shines so much more brightly in the marginally more emancipated mid-20th century setting. I wish we could sit and read you this whole script. It's so good.
It's great, folks. It really is.
And so help me, I am really starting to see the guy who created Star Trek in this stuff. It's becoming impossible to miss it.
My biggest takeaway, I mentioned it in discussion, but the sheer joy I had reading this script and getting frustrated with the misogynistic statements that Gifford had made, like, all through their date. And I'm like, why is she putting up with this guy? Can we just throw him out? Like, you can tell him to leave. It's your house. You even got your wing woman, Hank, coming out over. Like, yeah, she can make it awkward for you. Let's do that too. It's, I went from being really frustrated with that, like, oh man, Gene, not again. And then when she gets to emasculate him as a matter of public record. Like,
that's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Absolutely
over dinner, he's acting like he's got big brass ones. Oh no, he's got little styrofoam ones, and she is crumbling them in her hands in front of a full courtroom.
Right.
And I'm here for it.
Right. And there's a little bit of, like, nod at, like, she's, like, a sexually liberated woman. Like, oh, what time did he leave? And she gives him, like, midnight.
Midnight.
Not that it's any of your business.
That thought did occur. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, are we implying that they, reconnected? So I thought that was really interesting, that this is an extremely progressive script. So would that have made it to TV in 1961? Maybe some of it.
It just feels like this fell out of the future.
Right.
And got stamped 1961 because this does not feel like a 1961 script. Maybe 81 at the earliest.
I could see some gal with a perm rocking this.
Giant shoulder pads.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Shoulder pads and a perm.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have been a hat because you can't put a hat on that kind of hair. It would have been, oh, your new shoulder pads are here. Oh, don't work. Sorry. But yeah, this is delightful, and it's been in a box for 64 years.
Hey, this is good stuff. This is really good stuff.
Special thanks to the Roddenberry Repertory Players. Our cast this week featured Crystal Allen as Valerie Downs and John Champion as Bill Evans. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on Facebook at missionlogpod. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and Mission Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment.
On the next Gene-ology, Embezzler's Daughter. Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Rand Hurl, Tom Kozak, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.